We are a justice-making, truth-seeking people.
We gather as a community of believers and seekers.
We share a reverence for the mystery of life.
We are building the beloved community.
Come, let us worship together.
Good morning. A candombe is a piece that was brought into Argentina through slave trading, and it's associated with voodoo culture. The meaning has a double entendre. It's mi, meaning the third letter of the solfege alphabet, but also in mi, the driving rhythm inside of you.
My friends here in the sanctuary, look out the windows. This is a good morning. My friends at home, go to your window, open the blinds. This is a good morning. If you're watching this sometime later, take my word for it. This is a good morning. Good morning, Birmingham Unitarian Church.
Good morning.
As a multi-platform church, it is important for us to build a bridge between online and in-person participants. We're calling this Connection Opportunity Greeting our virtual neighbors. And I'm sure by now you know the drill. We're going to put up on the screen all our friends joining us from home through Zoom. We're going to ask them to turn on their cameras and wave. And now it's our turn. We're going to turn toward the back of the sanctuary, that black camera on the wall, and we're going to wave to our friends at home. Whenever and however we connect with BUC, we are building BUC. At home, on campus, in the world, every day, we are Birmingham Unitarian Church, and we are building the community that we love. As we light our chalice this morning in solidarity with UU congregations across the country and around the world, let us ponder the words from Plato's Republic, the allegory of the cave. But one who has their wits about them would remember that there are two things that blind the eyes: being brought from darkness to light and transitioning back from light to darkness.
Please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our first hymn this morning. It's number 16, 1-6, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in a place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. Then true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
A feature in The Economist in 2018 states, "True liberals contend that societies can change gradually for the better and from the bottom up. They differ from revolutionaries because they reject the idea that individuals should be coerced into accepting someone else's beliefs. They differ from conservatives because they assert that aristocracy and hierarchy, indeed all concentrations of power, tend to become sources of oppression. Over the past few decades, liberals have become too comfortable with power. As a result, they have lost their hunger for reform. The ruling liberal elite tell themselves that they preside over a healthy meritocracy and that they have earned their privileges. The reality is not so clear-cut." End of quote. This morning we'll explore the state of liberalism and its renewal.
For today's Time for All Ages, I'm going to be reading Change Sings by Amanda Gorman. And you may know Amanda Gorman as a young American poet and the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history. I can hear change humming in its loudest, proudest song. I don't fear change coming, and so I sing along. I scream with the skies of red and blue streamers. I dream with the cries of tried and true dreamers. I am a chant that rises and rings. There's hope where my change sings. Though some don't understand it, those windmills of mysteries, I sing with all the planet and its hills of histories. I hum with 100 hearts, each of us lifting a hand. I use my strengths and my smarts, take a knee to make a stand. I'm bright as the light each day brings. There is love where my change sings. I show others tolerance, though it might take some courage. I don't make a taller fence, but fight to build a better bridge. I talk not only of distances from where and how we came. I also walk our differences to show we are the same. I am a movement that roars and springs. There's a wave where my change sings. Change sings where? There. It's inside me, because I'm the change I want to see. As I grow, it grows like seeds. I am just what the world needs. I am the voice where freedom rings. You are the love your bright heart brings. We are the wave starting to spring, for we are the change we sing. We're what the world is becoming, and we know it won't be long. We all hear the change strumming. Won't you sing along? At this moment, we're going to have our K through 5th graders join us at the back of the sanctuary to head off to class.
The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious community that encourages lives of integrity, learning, service, and joy. One way we live out this mission is by giving half of our weekly offering to a nonprofit organization that shares our values and addresses needs in one of these areas: environmental action, economic justice, civic engagement, and racial justice. We support a new organization each month. Our recipient for April is Relief Michigan. Relief Michigan is Michigan's only statewide nonprofit tree planting organization, working with communities and organizations through Michigan to protect and restore our urban and rural tree canopies. Its mission is to educate the public on the value of trees and how to properly select, plant, and maintain them. Let there be an offering in support of our beloved community and organizations that build the world we dream about. This morning's offering will now be received with gratitude. Ushers, please come forward. We are a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. With gratitude, we dedicate this offering to the good works of our congregation and dedicate ourselves to its service.
In the words of William Blake, man was made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, through the world we safely go. Each week, members of our community share words of joy or sorrow with the congregation. If you would like to share a joy or sorrow in a future service, you can click on Share Joys and Sorrows button on the BUC homepage, or you can arrive a bit early and write it in the book at the back of the sanctuary. We've had no joys submitted for today. We share a sorrow with Kelly Taylor. Today is the 1-year anniversary of my father's death. I am missing him very much right now. Another sorrow we share is longtime member and former board member John Stoll is now in his heaven. After eating a bowl of ice cream Thursday night, he collapsed. There will be a musical celebration of his life here at BUC in May. Many of us have unspoken joys and sorrows and people whom we think of this morning. If you feel so moved, speak the names of those on your heart. May the spirit of our ancestors guide us in navigating changing times. Help us to discern the path to choose for our renewal. May we live up to the challenge given by Confucius. If you can revive the ancient and use it to understand the modern, then you're worthy to be a teacher. Let's pause for a moment of silence.
On the fourth Sunday of every month, we light candles to remember those who have died in that month in any year. You are welcome to light a candle for anyone that you're remembering this day or a concern on your heart. As you light your candle, you are invited to say the name of who you remember or any concern you have. Please rise in your own time, turn to the back of the sanctuary, and come up the aisle closest to the choir. Please remember to place your lighted candle as far back in the candle holder as you can. We begin by lighting a candle from our chalice for the ones who are remembered by those who have joined today's service via Zoom. Our first reading needs a bit of an introduction. When the ideals of the Enlightenment were first put forward in the late 1600s and early 1700s, they were considered radical, heretical, and treasonous. They turned a settled world upside down. Our first reading this morning is from the Pluralism Project at Harvard University and is entitled Enlightenment and Revolution. The Enlightenment was a 17th and 18th century international movement in ideas and sensibilities, emphasizing the exercise of critical reason as opposed to religious dogmatism or unthinking faith. It developed along with the rise of scientific thinking, independent of religious thought, and stressed the importance of nature and the natural order as a source of knowledge. In reaction to the religious wars of Europe, Enlightenment thinkers defended religious tolerance and religious freedom. Their emphasis on intellectual freedom and human rights led to a conflict between the advocates of these new ideas and the political and religious establishments in Europe, most dramatically in France. The Enlightenment in America, more moderate than in Europe, influenced both religious and political thought throughout the colonies. Many would argue that its approach to religious tolerance rose to prominence in America in large part because no single religious group could garner the necessary votes to impose themselves upon the fledgling republic. Leaders such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were considered paragons of Enlightenment thought, and the freedom-loving religious rationalism of their ideas helped to lay the foundation of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. The Enlightenment also bred religious controversy. Plenty of its advocates, many of whom were themselves Christian, often dismissed the new revivalist religion of the Great Awakening as emotionally excessive. Evangelical Protestants, on the other hand, often viewed rationalism, religious tolerance, and other Enlightenment ideals as dangerous to piety and national solidarity in the budding republic. Historians have usually cast this controversy in terms of a conflict between those who favored rational religion and those who opposed it by defending an emotional religion of the heart. But the Enlightenment was so pervasive in the colonies that few Americans remain wholly untouched by its spirit.
I majored in philosophy in college. In my senior year, I began to see how philosophies that may seem to be abstract in one generation become utilized and transformed into a way of thinking for future generations that is taken into the material world, particularly in the realms of religion, science, and political economy. Bringing this a bit closer to home, let's take a closer look at Enlightenment philosophy, the foundation for the United States of America and Unitarianism and Universalism. We'll look at this from three perspectives. How do we understand reality and the world around us? What is the role of the individual within society? And how do individuals work together for the common good? Starting with the first question, how do we understand reality and the world around us? To abstract thinkers like Rousseau and Leibniz, it was clear we can arrive at a closer understanding of an objective reality by applying reason to the evidence of our senses. Balanced against this use of reason and evidence is skepticism, the relentless demand to question everything. This abstract approach was applied by doers like Francis Bacon, who codified the scientific method by applying inductive reasoning to carefully collected data. Then engineers like James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine, took the scientific descriptions of objective reality and figured out how to control it. In short, there is an objective reality, and we can use science and reason to get closer to understanding it, and then use that knowledge to make the world a better place. Second question, what is the role of the individual within society? In an era of the divine right of kings and religious dogma, the Enlightenment philosophers put forth the idea that the individual has freedom of conscience. As long as a belief can stand up to reason, a person is entitled to that belief. But even if that belief cannot yet be proven, the individual has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And since all individuals have these same rights, you are free to believe and act as you like as long as you don't take away the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from others. This leads us to the third question. How do we get along with each other? We have freedom of conscience and a right to our own beliefs. So how do we fuse our individual freedoms collectively? While others may see things differently, we realize that we can come to greater knowledge and the ability to live and work together. We do this by engaging in rational dialogue, open to learning from each other by being open to changing ourselves. In short, the way to work together is through the democratic process, which, as Winston Churchill once said, is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. We certainly can see the Enlightenment thinking about getting along together, written by John Locke from the 1600s, manifested in the U.S. Declaration of Independence in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. But we also know that while asserting these ideals, the early United States was far from a nation of equality of all people, starting, of course, with the assertion that it is all men that are created equal, while concurrently engaging in the two national original sins, the genocide of the indigenous people of North America and the enslavement of Africans and African Americans. But the strength of these ideas is in their universality. Yes, the original thinkers were myopic in that they applied the ideals only to themselves. But others outside of their group saw the universality and demanded that they be applied to themselves as well. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's 1848 Declaration of Rights and Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Convention uses the values of the Declaration of Independence to challenge the country to include the equality of women. The Declaration begins with, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." By the way, this declaration was signed by, among others, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, in his July 5th speech in 1852, calls out in great detail the reason July 4th was not a celebration for the enslaved, with the following one of its most memorable quotes. "The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony." End quote. But despite this, he ends up not attacking the liberal values of the Enlightenment, but invoking them as agents of change. Quote, "I therefore leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence with the great principles it contains and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age." End quote. Abraham Lincoln, in his 1863 Gettysburg Address, clearly focuses the aim of the Civil War to expand on the values of the country's founders. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And, concluding with, "We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech continues the work of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln as he calls for even greater expansion. Quote, "So, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." End quote. These liberal Enlightenment values shine not just in the Unitarians who signed the Declaration of Independence, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Elbridge Gerry, Robert Treat Paine, and Roger Sherman. It also lives on in our sources and principles. Science and reason, the right of conscience and freedom of belief, the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, peace, liberty, and justice for all. These liberal Enlightenment values drew me to Unitarian Universalism, and they still inspire me. They are even more important today in a world faced with authoritarianism, climate change, injustice, and political polarization. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm jealous, since I tried classical guitar for a while and barely got through Bach's Beret, and that was about it. Our second reading is comprised of two excerpts for the Unitarian Universalist Association website. The first excerpt is from Engaging Our Theological Diversity, a report by UUA Commission on Appraisal from 2005. This is from the section entitled Outgrowing the Enlightenment Worldview. Unitarianism in particular claims strong roots in the Enlightenment. Its gifts are enduring: reason, a valuing of evidence and the scientific method; tolerance, the possibility of valuing multiple perspectives; and freedom, an appreciation of introspection, autonomy, and individual versus role identity, which prepared the ground for such movements as women's suffrage. The Enlightenment moved humans out of the center of the universe and encouraged imaginative possibility. Now we need to ask ourselves if it is possible that we have identified too strongly with a particular worldview and philosophical era. Could a continuing evolution of worldviews leave UUs holding the rear guard instead of at the front lines at this time of history? And skipping further down, it goes on to say, postmodernism is a reaction against or a corrective to modernism. Modernism in theology can be very broadly characterized as a worldview based on an optimistic faith in progress and the rational pursuit of knowledge. Modern thinking, by contrast, asserts that it is hard to predict whether science will eventually save the world or destroy it. Many of the words used by the authors to talk about the postmodern world, pluralistic, radically inclusive, syncretic, are the very words we could use to describe contemporary Unitarian Universalism. A familiarity with postmodern thought can help UUs to understand our own evolution as a movement. That's the first excerpt. The second excerpt is from the UUA Curricula and Faith Development, What Will Be and For Whom, which is currently available on the UU website. Unitarian Universalism appears to have a generally tepid appeal among people of color. Perhaps one reason for this is our being stuck in an Enlightenment or modernist mindset. Unitarianism was born of the same Enlightenment ideals of reason and tolerance encoded in our nation's foundational documents. Noble ideas born from the cultured musings of wealthy white men who saw the strengths of these philosophies without noticing the classist, racist, and sexist views latent within them. And it goes on to say, postmodernism need not only refer to convoluted interpretations of abstract theories by obscure authors. In this context, it means the view that socially, spiritually, ethically, and ethnically, there is no objectively true reality, but rather multiple subjectively true realities for different people from different perspectives. Thus, in the postmodernist view, diversity is inherently valued, not just added on to a presumed norm. Postmodernism also recognizes that the ideals that are liberating for you may be oppressive to me.
Our second reading illustrates how the UUA has embraced postmodern thought as a renewal of Unitarian Universalism. As stated by the UUA, a familiarity with postmodern thought can help UUs to understand our own evolution as a movement. Since I drew the short straw, my task this morning is to try to contribute to your familiarity with postmodern thought as much as I can in 10 minutes. Well, 11 minutes, maybe 12. There are many applications of the word postmodernism to art, literature, music, architecture. But this morning, the new frontier for UUism that we are talking about is postmodernist philosophy. So what is postmodernist philosophy? To answer that question, I turned to my go-to source on philosophy, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The first sentence in the entry on postmodernism reads, that postmodernism is indefinable is a truism. That's philosopher talk for damned if we know. After reading much deeper and wider, some of the original French thinkers and some of their later interpreters and critics, I found that the reason postmodernist thought is so hard to pin down is because it is defined by what it rejects. I would summarize the core of postmodernist thought this way. Premise 1, the world today, the modern world, sucks. Premise 2, the modern world is built on the ideals of the Enlightenment, which are just some wild ideas of a bunch of dead rich guys from Europe. Conclusion, we need to reject Enlightenment ideals so that we can get to the postmodern world. Okay, so if the new frontier for the Unitarian Universalism is postmodernist thought, what does that frontier look like? What do you get when you reject Enlightenment ideals? The most succinct description I found was the Encyclopedia Britannica's entry for postmodernism. It characterizes postmodernist thought with the following condensed statements. There is no objective reality. There is only subjective experience. There is no such thing as truth. It all depends on your perspective. Science is only a social construct developed to preserve an oppressive power structure of white men. Reason and logic are not universally valid. They are just tools used by the oppressive power structure. There is no universal human nature. We are each only a product of the culture we belong to. Language cannot convey an objective truth. Words have no static meaning. Evidence does not reduce uncertainty about objective reality. See point 1, there is no objective reality. There are only narratives, stories about our subjective experience. Any theory that seeks to objectively describe the world is oppressive to the subjective experience of others. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, this is what you get when you reject Enlightenment ideals. This is postmodernist philosophy. Postmodernist philosophy as an academic subject came and went pretty quickly. It started with some French philosophers who were dismayed with the state of Europe after World War II and was exported to American universities in the 1960s. By the 1980s, graduate students in philosophy were generally discouraged by their advisors from pursuing dissertations in postmodernism. Mostly that's because postmodernist writing is like a snake eating its own tail. In the academic work I've done, my task was relatively easy. I developed a model of some part of reality, and I described it through language and math so that others could judge whether my evidence and reasoning were coherent and cohesive. Since for postmodernist scholars, there is no objective reality, and words have no static meaning, there's really nothing to write about, and why bother anyway? Consequently, most postmodernist academic papers are equivocal and are presented in language that serves more to obscure than to clarify. But as we heard in the second reading, postmodernism need not only refer to convoluted interpretations of abstract theories by obscure authors. So, how is postmodernist thought applied in the real world? Let's look at the three concepts Keith reviewed: reality, the individual, and the common good. First, postmodernist reality. In postmodernist thought, there is no objective reality, just a subjective experience. Reality is created, not discovered. Reality is created through discourse. We tell stories about what our reality is like. So your reality is your reality, and my reality is my reality. If we come from cultures that have different discourses about reality, different stories, there is no way we can share our realities because we can't be sure that the way you are using words is the same way that I am using words. How does this play out in the real world? There is a paper in the National Institutes of Health Library of Medicine written in 2011 entitled, and stick with me, it's a long title, Anti-Vaccine Activists, Web 2.0 and the Postmodern Paradigm, an overview of tactics and tropes used online by the anti-vaccination movement. It says, quote, using Web 2.0 for health collaboration has benefits: patient empowerment, consumer reviews and advice, supportive communities, but has drawbacks as well. The connective power of the internet also brings together those previously considered on the fringe. Members of marginalized groups, for example, Holocaust deniers, 9/11 truthers, AIDS deniers, can easily and uncritically interact with like-minded individuals online. There, it is easy to fall into a trap of self-referencing and mutually reinforcing links that can fool users into believing there are many who share their beliefs, when in reality, it may only be a small, committed group, end quote. If your mind leaps to those on the political right who rejected the COVID vaccine, you should know that this paper is really about those left-leaning enclaves in California that had kindergarten vaccination rates for measles below 20%. In postmodernist thinking, anti-vaxxers have their reality, and it is as valid as anyone else's. Now the individual. In postmodernist thinking, you cannot march to the beat of a different drummer. You have no such agency. You are only a product of the culture that you come from, and the symbols that represent your culture are the definition of who you are. You either have a sign in your yard that says Black Lives Matter, or you have a sign in your yard that says Blue Lives Matter. If you don't have a sign in your yard, according to postmodernist thinking, you don't really matter. In the postmodernist view, you need a symbol for your narrative, so pick a sign. Kenneth J. Gergen, a psychologist and researcher who applies postmodernist thinking in psychology, says, quote, I propose that we all take to be real, that all we take to be real, rational, and good emerges not from individual minds, but from relational process. It is not individuals who come together to form relationships. Rather, it is out of collaborative action that the very conception of the individual mind comes into existence, or not. On this view, psychological processes such as thinking and feeling do not precede or cause our actions. In other words, and that ends the quote, in other words, in postmodernist philosophy, you are your Twitter feed. Finally, the common good. In postmodernist thought, there is none. Since there is only subjective experience, and subjective experience is entirely driven by a group's narrative, there's only different groups that are either the oppressor or the oppressed. How does this play out in actual organizations? Morris Mitchell, an activist and the National Director of the Working Families Party, says in his essay entitled Building Resilient Organizations, quote, executives in professional social justice institutions, grassroots activists in local movements, and fiery young radicals on protest lines are all advancing urgent concerns about the internal workings of progressive spaces. The themes arising are surprisingly consistent. Many claim that our spaces are toxic or problematic, often sharing compelling and troubling personal anecdotes as evidence of this. People in leadership are finding their roles untenable, claiming it is impossible to execute campaigns, or saying they are in organizations that are stuck, end quote. Mitchell lists 10 causes for these problems. Number one on that list is neoliberal identity. He defines it as, quote, using one's identity or personal experience as a justification for a political position. You may hear someone argue, as a working class, first-generation American Southern woman, I say we have to vote no. What's implied is that one's identity is a comprehensive validator of one's political strategy. That identity is evidence of some intrinsic ideological or strategic legitimacy. Marginalized identity is deployed as a conveyor of a strategic truth that must simply be accepted. Likewise, historically privileged identities are essentialized, flattened, and frequently, for better or worse, dismissed, end quote. What Mitchell describes is not individuals striving for a common good, but different identity groups staking out immutable positions and taking performative stances. There is a lot more that can be said about postmodernist thinking, and some no doubt that is positive. But my purpose this morning is to set your feet on the path, not to take the journey for you. But it is clear that since at least the 2000s, the UUA has proposed postmodernism, the rejection of Enlightenment thinking, as the new frontier for Unitarian Universalism. This morning I've tried to demonstrate that we don't have to look very far to see what that postmodernist frontier for UUism looks like. Postmodernist thinking is not abstract and in the future. It is already with us. It is right here and it is right now. Words mean whatever you want them to mean. Identity trumps common humanity, and the driving force in society is oppression. So the question is not whether we renew Unitarian Universalism, but how do we renew it? Do we regard Enlightenment ideals as old and failed and reject them? Or do we insist, like past liberal leaders have, that these Enlightenment ideals are in fact the very force bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice?
Will you please rise in body or spirit and join in singing our final hymn this morning, number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life. Blessed Spirit of my life, give me strength through stress and strife. Help me live with dignity. Let me know serenity. Fill me with a vision. Clear my mind of fear and confusion. When my thoughts flow restlessly, let peace find a home in me. Spirit of great mystery, hear the still small voice in me. Help me live my wordless creed as I comfort those in need. Fill me with compassion, be the source of my intuition. Then when life is done for me, let love be my legacy.
We extinguish our chalice with more words of Socrates. What our message now signifies is that the ability and means of learning is already present in the soul. Go now into this world as a beacon of hope and joy. Go in love, go in peace. Now that our worship has ended, our service begins. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.